It all started with a single email. One of those cold, official HOA announcements written in bold fonts and sprinkled with unnecessary formality. The subject line read, "Reminder, noise restrictions for all residents." At first glance, it seemed harmless enough. Just another reminder from the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association about community harmony and respect. But tucked inside, near the bottom, was a new addition to the bylaws. A brand new noise control policy, approved by the board in a closed-door meeting the week before IT stated that all music or amplified sound must cease by 9 p.m. sharp. No exceptions. The announcement hit harder than most people expected. Willow Ridge was a quiet, tidy neighborhood, but it wasn't that quiet. Most of us were working adults who enjoyed winding down in our own ways. Some gardened, some watched sports on their patios. And then there was me, Alex Carter, the guy who loved his backyard sound system. Music had always been my thing. Not parties, not blaring bass that rattled windows, just music. I worked long hours as a graphic designer, and my one escape was a small gathering on Friday nights in my driveway. A few friends, some drinks, soft lights, and a carefully curated playlist that set the mood for the weekend, and no one ever complained to least. Not until she moved in. Her name was Patricia Henderson, though most of the neighborhood had already started referring to her by a less flattering nickname, HOA Karen. She'd been in the neighborhood for barely 6 weeks before joining the HOA board and, within 2 meetings, was spearheading initiatives to make the community more orderly. The noise rule, it turned out, was her brainchild. Apparently, she lived 3 houses down from me and claimed she could hear the vibrations from my music through her walls. She didn't come talk to me directly, of course. She just filed an official complaint. Then another. Then pushed to have the entire HOA adopt her new rule. And somehow she got it passed. When the new policy went into effect, I thought maybe it would blow over. But that first weekend proved otherwise. Friday night rolled around like usual. I got home from work, turned on some mellow jazz, and sat outside with my neighbor Tom. The sky was fading to pink, and the air was finally cool after a long, humid week. It was barely 8:45 when I saw the first flash of headlights turn the corner. A white SUV slowed to a crawl in front of my driveway. The tinted window rolled down, and there she was, Patricia herself, with a clipboard in hand and a smug, tight-lipped smile. She didn't say a word, but she didn't have to. She just raised her phone, snapped a photo of us, and drove off at 9:07. I got an email. Noise violation notice. Future infractions will incur fines. That was when I realized what this was. It wasn't about the noise. It was about control. I wasn't the only one she targeted. Over the next week, I learned she'd also gone after a family down the street for their kids playing basketball in the driveway, too late, and another neighbor for hosting a small birthday party that ran until 10. She even complained about someone's wind chimes. By the second week, the whole neighborhood was tense. Friday nights felt empty. The laughter, the music, even the sound of a backyard barbecue, all gone. It was eerie, like the life had been drained from the street. That's when the idea started to form. It began as a joke between me and Tom. We were sitting in silence one evening, sipping beers, when he said something about how ridiculous it was, that the rule didn't ban gatherings, just noise. We could have as many people as we wanted outside, as long as it was quiet. And that's when I remembered something I'd seen online, a clip of a silent disco, a party where everyone wore wireless headphones, each tuned to the same playlist. From the outside, it looked like a bunch of people dancing in silence. The more I thought about it, the better it sounded. A loophole. A perfect, peaceful, rule-abiding form of rebellion. Over the next few days, I got to work. I ordered a bulk pack of LED-lit wireless headphones, built a shared playlist, and sent out a few quiet invitations to the neighbors I knew were tired of the new rule. By Friday afternoon, the word had spread farther than I expected. When the sun went down, the first people began to arrive, cautiously curious. Each one received a pair of headphones, glowing in soft blue light. I passed them out like candy, explaining how to sync them to the shared channel. By 8:30, there were 20 of us gathered in my driveway. The music started silent to anyone not wearing a headset. Within seconds, smiles spread across faces as people realized what was happening. Heads bobbed in rhythm, Feet moved to beats only we could hear from the street. It looked surreal. A crowd of people dancing in eerie quiet, illuminated by shifting lights from the headphones at 9 o'clock sharp. I saw the familiar white SUV turn onto the street. Patricia slowed as she always did. Her face was a mix of confusion and suspicion as she saw the crowd in my driveway, everyone moving, laughing, and smiling. But not a sound could be heard. She rolled down her window, scanning the scene like a security guard trying to catch a crime in progress. But there was nothing to hear. She sat there for a long moment, glaring, then drove off. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of messages in the neighborhood group chat. Someone had posted a video, taken from across the street, showing the entire event. Dozens of people, dancing under the night sky, glowing headphones pulsing in unison. The caption read, "The quietest party in Willow Ridge history." By noon, it had gone local viral. The video was being shared around the city, with people laughing at how the HOA's new rule had turned into something even bigger. A weekly event that people wanted to join. But while most of the neighbors loved it, Patricia did not. By Sunday evening, a new email arrived from the HOA board. It was labeled Urgent Discussion. Unauthorized Assembly. Apparently, the noise control policy had backfired, but instead of admitting it, Patricia was doubling down. The next HOA meeting would determine whether driveway gatherings were allowed at all. And I had a feeling she wasn't going to let this one go quietly. The HOA meeting was scheduled for Wednesday night. Normally, hardly anyone showed up to these things, but this time it was standing room only. Word of the silent disco incident, as some neighbors were calling it, had spread far beyond Willow Ridge. A local community page had picked up the story, calling it the most peaceful protest in HOA history. The video had racked up thousands of views. Teenagers were tagging it with captions like, "When your neighborhood bans fun but you outsmart them." And Patricia hated every second of it. The meeting opened with the usual pleasantries, but the tension was thick enough to cut through. The president, a mild-mannered man named George, tried to keep things calm. But as soon as he mentioned community noise issues, Patricia leaned forward in her chair like a hawk ready to strike. She had a new stack of printed papers, her evidence, photos of my driveway, screenshots of the viral video, and what looked like a hastily printed list of revised HOA rules she wanted to propose from the back of the room. I could feel her glare. She stood up and launched into a long, silent tirade, her hands cutting through the air with dramatic emphasis, flipping through pages, pointing at the photos, shaking her head in disgust. Even without sound, it was clear she was spinning a story, one about unsafe gatherings, traffic congestion, and violations of community decorum. What she didn't mention, of course, was that the event was completely within the existing rules. No amplified music, no disturbances, no trespassing. Still, she wanted to change that. Her proposed amendment would ban any form of organized assembly or event involving more than 5 non-resident guests after 8:30 p.m. She claimed it was about safety, but everyone knew what it really was, a personal vendetta dressed in official language. But then, something unexpected happened. For the first time, people started pushing back. The usually quiet neighbors, the ones who'd never spoken in meetings, raised their hands. One by one, they began expressing silent disapproval. The body language said it all. Crossed arms, headshakes, raised eyebrows. Even the treasurer, who usually agreed with everything Patricia said just to keep the peace, looked uncomfortable. When George finally called for a vote, Patricia was confident. But as hands rose around the room, the result was undeniable. Her motion failed. The look on her face was something between disbelief and fury. She'd just lost control of the one thing she valued most, the HOA's authority. That night, I walked home feeling victorious. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt alive again. People were outside chatting, laughing quietly, asking when the next silent disco would be. So that weekend, I decided to do it again, bigger this time. Instead of 20 people, 50 showed up. Some brought snacks, others brought glow sticks and lawn chairs. Families came, kids danced, even older neighbors joined in, swaying to music only they could hear. The air buzzed with silent joy. From a distance, you could see the colors from the headphones glowing blue, green, and red. A rainbow of quiet rebellion. But while we danced, Patricia was plotting. She spent the entire week documenting everything she could. She called the city to check for permit requirements, tried to contact the local police, even reached out to the county health department to report a mass gathering. But each time, she hit the same wall. There was no law being broken. That's when she changed tactics. The following Friday, just as people were starting to gather again, the streetlights flickered, then went dark. A sudden blackout. At first, everyone thought it was a power outage. But then we noticed something odd. The houses across the street still had power. Only our side was dark. Moments later, we saw a faint flashlight beam moving near the HOA's maintenance shed, the one only board members had access to. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. People murmured and pointed, but I just laughed. Because what Patricia hadn't realized was that the silent disco didn't need power. Our music ran off wireless transmitters and portable batteries. Our lights were rechargeable LEDs. Within seconds, the darkness made the whole scene even more magical. Glowing headphones floating in the dark, people dancing under a moonlit sky. At IT was the most beautiful night yet. When the power came back an hour later, Patricia was standing at the end of the street, her face illuminated by the headlights of her SUV. She looked utterly defeated. BY Sunday morning. Someone had leaked the footage from a doorbell camera showing her sneaking around the HOA shed that night with a flashlight. The clip spread quickly, paired with the caption, "When you try to kill the vibe, but the vibe survives." The HOA board called an emergency session the next day. Rumors spread fast. Some said they were going to investigate her for misuse of HOA property. Others said she might be suspended from the board altogether. And for once, I didn't feel nervous about what was coming next. But Patricia wasn't done in her mind. She was the hero, the guardian of order, the last line of defense against chaos. And when people like her felt cornered, they didn't back down. They went nuclear. The next Friday, just as I was setting up for what everyone was calling Disco Night 3, I saw her SUV drive past again. Only this time, she wasn't alone. There were 2 uniformed city officers in the passenger seats. She'd finally found a way to take the fight beyond the HOA. And as she stepped out of the car, clipboard in hand and smile sharp as glass, I knew the real showdown was about to begin. By the time the police car stopped at the end of my driveway, the silent disco was already in full swing. Rows of glowing headphones bobbed in the dark, soft light spilling from portable lanterns. Kids laughed, couples danced, and my dog lay curled up near the porch, tail thumping in quiet rhythm. The neighborhood had never felt more alive, or more united. When Patricia stepped out of the SUV, the faint crunch of her heels on gravel was the only sound. She was dressed like she was heading to court, not a driveway gathering. Stiff blazer, hair perfectly in place, clutching her infamous clipboard as if it were a weapon. The 2 officers followed behind her, their faces unreadable, scanning the scene with detached curiosity. Everyone stopped dancing when they saw her. Dozens of glowing headphones turned in unison, like synchronized spotlights. That IT must have felt like standing in front of an army. She marched forward, chin high, speaking rapidly to the officers and waving her hand toward us. Her gestures were sharp, impatient, and full of self-importance. Pointing to the crowd, then the street, then my house. From where I stood, I could only imagine what she was saying. Probably something about unauthorized events, public disturbances, and unsafe conditions. She had a talent for stretching the truth until it nearly snapped. But tonight, truth wasn't on her side. The officers approached me next, one of them holding up a hand, calm, professional. I took off my headphones, and the silence around me deepened. Behind them, Patricia watched with a smirk that said she thought she'd finally won. They spoke briefly, asking polite, procedural questions: how many people were here, what time the event started, whether we were using amplified sound. I explained everything, showing them the small transmitter, the wireless headsets, the decibel meter app on my phone that never once broke the city's limit. That IT was clear they already knew. Apparently, they'd received multiple complaints that night, all from the same number. The dispatcher had decided to send a patrol to check, but there was no evidence of any law being broken. I could see the realization dawning on Patricia's face as the officers nodded and handed back my ID. They thanked me for my cooperation and told me to have a good night. Then they turned to her. Their tone shifted slightly, polite but firm. They gestured toward her car, then toward the other side of the street. One of them even pointed to the sidewalk, where she'd parked, partially blocking a hydrant. Whatever they said made her expression falter, and just like that, Patricia, the self-appointed enforcer of community order, was the one being told to move along. As she stomped back toward her SUV, the crowd slowly started moving again. The music swelled, silently, but in perfect sync. People began dancing once more, laughter bubbling up like the sound had never stopped. The officers stayed for a minute, smiling faintly, then left without incident. For the first time, Patricia had lost the battle entirely, but she wasn't just angry, she was humiliated. The next morning, I woke up to find an email in my inbox titled, HOA Emergency Sanctions Hearing. Patricia had called for an immediate disciplinary review against me. She wanted to fine me for disturbing the peace, organizing an unapproved event, and disrespecting HOA authority. It was scheduled for Sunday evening. I expected it to be hostile. I expected her to throw everything she had at me, but I didn't expect what happened next. When I joined the meeting, again over Zoom, nearly half the neighborhood had logged in too. People who'd never cared about HOA politics before were suddenly active, watching, waiting. Patricia opened the meeting with her usual flair. Long, dramatic statements, cherry-picked evidence, and the same video clips she'd used at the last meeting. But this time, no one seemed impressed. In fact, as she ranted, something else started happening in the chat. Neighbors began posting screenshots, not of my events, but of her actions. Photos of her SUV parked illegally. Videos of her sneaking around the HOA shed during the blackout. Even clips from her own front yard, showing her hosting late-night wine parties with loud music. The exact thing she claimed to despise. The hypocrisy was laid bare for everyone to see. She tried to defend herself, waving papers and pointing fingers, but the board members had already made up their minds. George, the HOA president, leaned back and rubbed his temples. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. Patricia was formally censured for misuse of HOA property, abuse of power, and harassment of residents. Effective immediately, she was removed from the board. It was over. The silence on the Zoom call was thick and satisfying. One by one, the little squares on the screen blinked out as people left the meeting. Patricia's camera stayed on for a long time, her face frozen, eyes hard. Then she disappeared too. The next morning, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. By the end of the month, her SUV was gone. Willow Ridge changed after that. Without Patricia's iron grip, the HOA softened. The rules didn't vanish, but they started to make sense again. Fewer fines, fewer threats, more common sense. People began talking to each other instead of reporting each other. And on Friday nights, the silent disco became a tradition. What started as an act of defiance turned into a symbol of unity. Families, neighbors, and even the HOA board joined in. The kids painted a banner that read, "The Quiet Revolution," and every week the street glowed with blue and green lights. Sometimes, when I look back at the first email Patricia sent, the one that started it all, I can't help but laugh. Her attempt to silence the neighborhood ended up creating something louder than any music I could have played. Not in decibels, but in spirit. Because here's the funny thing about control: the harder someone tries to enforce it, the more powerful the pushback becomes. And in our case, that pushback just happened to have rhythm, LED lights, and the quietest rebellion you could imagine.